Do you actually know what you're holding, Mademoiselle Bardot? Dr. Bernard Dorival asked from behind his desk, loud enough for the museum staff gathered in the hallway to hear. Several people near the office door turned toward the painting in her hands. A museum cannot accept donations based on celebrity enthusiasm, he added, his voice carrying across the room. 8 staff members watched from the doorway as Bardot stood silently in front of his desk holding the canvas. Dorival leaned back in his chair. Unless, of course, you can name the artist. 8 museum staff members stood visible in the doorway behind her, their bodies forming a loose cluster in the hallway just beyond the office threshold, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding inside the curator's office. 3 board members in dark suits occupied positions farther down the corridor near a marble column, their faces turned toward the office entrance, their conversations halted mid-sentence. 2 journalists stood near the secretary's desk 10 feet from the office door with spiral notepads in their hands, pens already positioned above blank pages, their attention focused entirely on the exchange between Dorival and Bardot. The painting measured approximately 3 feet by 4 feet, the abstract composition visible even from the hallway, bold geometric shapes in primary colors against a black background. Bardot's fingers gripped the sides of the simple dark wood frame at shoulder height, her hands positioned at the 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock positions, her wrists locked to keep the canvas steady. Dorival's eyes moved from her face to the painting and back, his gaze traveling the distance in a slow, deliberate scan, his expression neutral but his jaw set. The office door remained fully open, creating a direct sightline from the hallway into the room, the doorway framing the scene like a proscenium arch. Dorival's desk sat positioned facing the doorway with military precision, every object on its surface, telephone, desk lamp, leather blotter, arranged in perfect alignment. The witnesses in the hall leaned slightly forward, their upper bodies tilting at 5-degree angles, their weight shifting from heels to the balls of their feet. If you're interested in untold stories from cinema's golden age, subscribe now. This is a fictionalized dramatization inspired by real public figures and historical settings. It does not depict a documented event. Dorival gestured with his right hand toward the wall behind his desk where 3 framed credentials hung in ornate gold frames, each one displaying official seals and embossed lettering visible even from Bardot's position. This museum has maintained rigorous standards for 70 years, he said, his voice pitched slightly higher than his opening question, carrying a tone of institutional authority. His hand moved in a sweeping motion across the certificates and diplomas, his fingers spread wide, his palm facing the wall as if presenting evidence to a courtroom. Your background is cinema, not art history, Dorival continued, his voice rising slightly in volume so that every word reached the staff members in the hallway and the journalists near the secretary's desk. Staff members in the doorway exchanged glances, their eyes meeting and their heads tilting toward each other in small conspiratorial movements, their eyebrows raising in synchronized expressions. A woman near the front of the cluster crossed her arms over her chest, her hands gripping her elbows, her posture shifting from neutral observation to defensive judgment. One of the board members in the hallway took 2 steps closer to the office entrance, his polished shoes creating 2 distinct clicking sounds against the marble floor that echoed in the corridor. The journalists opened their notepads with quick flipping motions, the spiral bindings making soft metallic sounds, and positioned pens above blank pages, their hands poised to record every word. Dorival's secretary at the desk outside the office stopped typing mid-sentence, her fingers frozen above the typewriter keys, her head turning toward the office to listen. We must protect the integrity of our collection, Dorival said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with his left hand, his thumb and forefinger pinching the bridge and pushing the frames higher on his nose. The staff members shifted their weight from foot to foot and whispered brief comments to one another behind raised hands, their lips moving in quick exchanges, their eyes never leaving Bardot's position. Bardot's grip on the painting frame remained steady, her fingers maintaining their positions at the sides, her shoulders level and square. The painting showed abstract geometric shapes in bold primary colors, sharp-edged triangles of red, circular forms in blue, rectangular sections in yellow, all arranged against a matte black background that absorbed rather than reflected the overhead office lights. The canvas surface had a subtle texture visible in the light, the brushstrokes creating gentle ridges and valleys across the painted surface. Dorival leaned back in his leather chair, the mechanism releasing a faint pneumatic sigh, his hands now resting on the armrests. Dorival stood from his desk with deliberate slowness, his weight pressing down on the armrests as he rose, his chair rolling backwards 6 inches on its casters until it contacted the credenza behind him with a soft thud. The museum cannot accept donations from collectors who lack proper provenance documentation, he declared, his voice now loud enough to carry clearly into the hallway and down the corridor, the words enunciated with precision and force. His right hand rose from his side and waved dismissively at the painting Bardot held, his fingers flicking through the air in a gesture of rejection, his wrist snapping at the end of the motion. Staff members in the doorway crowded closer together, their bodies shifting inward and creating a tighter cluster, shoulders touching shoulders, the space between individuals compressing to inches. The three board members stepped forward in near unison until they stood just outside the office threshold, their toes nearly touching the transition from marble hallway to oak office floor. Both journalists began writing in their notepads, their pens moving rapidly across the pages in swift horizontal strokes, the scratching sound of pen on paper audible in the brief pauses between Dorival's words. Without authentication, this could be anything, Dorival said, walking around the left side of his desk with measured steps, his path taking him past the corner and into the open floor space between furniture and visitor. He stopped 3 feet from Bardot and looked at the painting with narrowed eyes, his eyelids reducing the aperture of his gaze to critical slits, his head tilting 15 degrees to the right. A replica, a student work, even a forgery. The final word landed with emphasis, hanging in the air for 2 full seconds. All eyes turned toward Bardot. Every face in the doorway rotating to look directly at her, every pair of eyes in the hallway focusing on her position in front of Dorival's desk. Her face remained expressionless, the muscles around her mouth and eyes relaxed, her lips closed in a neutral line, her shoulders level with no visible tension in her neck or upper back. The painting stayed positioned between her and Dorival, the canvas acting as a physical barrier, the colorful geometric shapes creating a bright shield between the two figures. A board member in the hallway spoke up, his voice cutting across the room with the confidence of institutional authority. "Does the piece have authentication certificates?" His question hung in the air, the final syllable extending and fading. Other voices murmured in agreement from the doorway, creating a low rumble of sound. "Yes, important question, provenance," the words overlapping and blending together. Staff members stepped fully into the doorway now, their feet crossing the threshold from hallway to office, filling the rectangular frame with bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, faces stacked in 2 visible rows. The office secretary rose from her desk chair with an audible scrape of wood against floor, her body turning toward the office, her typing abandoned. Dorival crossed his arms over his chest and waited, his weight shifting to his right foot, his chin lifting slightly upward, his expression expectant. "Provenance documentation is essential," Dorival said, his arms still crossed, his hands gripping his biceps, creating creases in the fabric of his suit jacket sleeves. "Surely you understand that, Mademoiselle Bardot." The statement carried the weight of condescension, the tone suggesting ignorance on her part. The journalists continued writing, their pens moving rapidly across the pages, filling line after line with shorthand notation. One staff member whispered to another behind her raised hand, her palm creating a barrier between her mouth and the rest of the room, her companion nodding in response. A board member shook his head slowly from side to side, the motion deliberate and visible, his mouth forming a tight line of disapproval. The room went quiet for 3 seconds, the conversation ceasing, the movement stopping, the only sound the scratching of pens on paper from the journalist's position near the secretary's desk. Dorival uncrossed his arms and gestured toward the painting with both hands, his palms open and facing upward, his fingers spread wide in a questioning posture. "I'm waiting for your response," he said, his voice carrying a note of impatience, the words clipped and direct. His eyebrows raised, creating 3 horizontal lines across his forehead, his mouth settling into a position of skeptical waiting. The witnesses in the doorway stood motionless, their bodies frozen in their packed arrangement, their breathing shallow and synchronized. Bardot's fingers adjusted their grip on the frame, her right hand releasing and repositioning 2 inches lower, her left hand following the same motion, the subtle shift preparing for movement. No one moved. The overhead lights created a glare on the painting's varnished surface, bright rectangular reflections that obscured portions of the geometric composition. Bardot rotated the painting 180 degrees in a single smooth motion, her arms and shoulders working in coordinated movement, turning the canvas away from Dorival and toward herself, the back of the painting now facing him and the assembled witnesses. The back of the painting now faced outward, revealing what had been hidden: multiple papers taped to the canvas backing in organized rows. Multiple white and cream-colored documents were taped to the canvas backing in overlapping rows, covering nearly half the visible surface, creating a patchwork of official paperwork. The certificates and provenance documents covered the upper and middle sections of the back surface, each one affixed with transparent tape at the corners and edges. Official seals were visible on several papers: red wax stamps the size of coins, embossed letterheads with raised institutional logos, governmental stamps in blue and black ink. Bardot held the painting steady at chest height, her arms locked in position, the frame perfectly horizontal, every document clearly visible to Dorival and the witnesses behind her. Dorival took one step forward, his right foot moving first, his body weight following, closing the distance between himself and the painting to less than 2 feet. His mouth opened slightly, his jaw dropping half an inch, creating a small gap between his lips. The staff members in the doorway leaned to see around Bardot's shoulder, their bodies bending left and right, their heads craning at angles to get clear sightlines to the documentation. The board members moved into the office entrance, their bodies crossing the threshold from hallway to office floor, their feet carrying them forward in small shuffling steps. Journalists stopped writing mid-sentence, their pens frozen above their notepads in stationary positions, the tips no longer touching paper. 5 seconds passed. The room held its collective breath. Dorival walked around his desk toward the painting, his eyes fixed on the documents taped to the canvas backing, his gaze never wavering from the papers. He crossed the space in 4 measured steps, each footfall deliberate and controlled, his path taking him directly to Bardot's position. His hand reached forward, but stopped 6 inches from the canvas backing, his fingers extended but not making contact, hovering in the air above the nearest certificate. The authentication certificates showed typed text in neat rows, official signatures in black ink at the bottom of each document, institutional letterheads printed at the top with elaborate logos and formal typography. Gallery letterheads were visible on 3 documents, established Paris galleries with recognizable names and addresses listed beneath their titles. A museum stamp appeared on one certificate in the upper right corner, the circular impression showing a coat of arms and Latin text. 10 seconds passed. Dorival's hand remained suspended in the air. Dorival's fingers touched the edge of one certificate, his thumb and forefinger pinching the corner of the paper, lifting it slightly away from the canvas, to read the text beneath and beside it. His eyes scanned left to right across the lines of typed text, reading authentication statements, dates, signatures, institutional endorsements. The staff members remained frozen in the doorway, their bodies forming a stationary cluster of witnesses, their faces all turned toward the painting, their expressions shifting from skepticism to surprise. Board members leaned forward from their positions at the office entrance, their upper bodies angling toward the scene, their hands gripping the doorframe for balance. One journalist's notebook dropped slightly, the hand holding it lowering from chest level to waist level, the grip loosening, the pen still wedged between fingers but no longer writing. 15 seconds passed. No sound except Dorival's breathing, audible now in the complete silence. Dorival's mouth opened wider as he recognized official seals and signatures on the documents, his jaw dropping another half-inch, his eyes widening, the white visible around his irises. His hand moved from one certificate to another, his fingers touching edges and corners, reading each document in sequence: gallery authentication, museum appraisal, artist foundation verification, exhibition history. The room remained silent, except for the faint sound of paper rustling as his fingers lifted and released the taped documents. Dorival turned and walked quickly back to his desk, his previous measured pace abandoned, his steps covering the distance in half the time it had taken him to approach. He picked up the telephone receiver with his right hand, lifting it from the cradle with a swift motion, bringing it to his ear. "Send someone with the museum acquisition paperwork immediately," he said into the phone, his voice no longer carrying the authoritative tone from minutes earlier, now clipped and businesslike, almost urgent. The board members stepped fully into the office, their feet crossing from hallway to office floor in a series of footsteps that created a brief percussion of heel strikes against oak. They walked toward the painting, their paths converging on Bardot's position, circling around to see the certificates from different angles, their heads tilting to read the documents. One board member extended his hand to congratulate Bardot, his palm open, his arm reaching across the space between them, his mouth forming words of approval. The journalists closed their notepads with quick snapping motions, the spiral bindings collapsing shut, and moved toward the office entrance with accelerated steps, their stories already forming, their deadline priorities shifting. Staff members dispersed from the doorway, their tight cluster breaking apart as individuals turned and returned to their workstations down the hallway, the conversation resuming in scattered voices. The office secretary sat back down at her desk and resumed typing, the keys clicking in steady rhythm, the mechanical sounds filling the space where confrontation had been.